Hello there, and welcome back to the Level 2 lessons for the Star Wars Unlimited Judge Program. As always, I'm your host Jonah, and this lesson marks the first Level 2 lesson covering the Competitive Policy Guide. We're going to discuss some material in the early part of the document, taking a wide-angle look at policy and the underlying philosophy. The goal of this lesson isn't to get into the specifics for any situation, or even talk about particular infractions. This is all about setting up that foundation that I continue to discuss. As always with policy, this is an area that is continually being refined and will grow and evolve as play also continues to evolve. This does make it a bit of a challenge to both learn and teach, so this is likely a lesson that will similarly evolve over time. So, as the Competitive Policy Guide says, in order for competition to have meaning, participants must agree to play within a set of rules or boundaries. In the case of Star Wars Unlimited, those boundaries are the comprehensive rules and the associated tournament documents, as well as appropriate clarifications and errata. This makes sense on an instinctual level. If players weren't constrained by the rules, players would be playing a game of Calvin Ball, which is an anachronistic American reference. Another way to say it is that players would be able to do whatever they want. They could say, "I declare myself the winner," and that would be how it is. Of course, their opponent would similarly be able to declare themselves the victor. They'd call a judge, and we'd have to figure it out. Hence, rules. Of course, this leads to when players accidentally break the rules. Both players, in a fair and competitive environment, will want that break addressed and the error remedied. That's where policy comes in. For competitive play, as stakes begin to grow, whether they're for higher value prizes, invitations to exclusive events, or just exceptional bragging rights against a crowd of thousands of competitors, it's important that there are rules to how we remedy errors as well. These rules about addressing player errors are what constitute policy. And here, it's critical that we are consistent in policy. Like players knowing that if I play resupply, it becomes a resource, it is important for players to know that if I forget this trigger, this is how it will be handled. One of the goals of competitive play is to find the best player within the rules. If the policy, the way the rules are enforced, are inconsistent, then it's effectively the same as the rules being inconsistent, and it delegitimizes a player's victory. If, for example, a store develops a habit of having all players draw an opening hand of 7 cards and starting with 3 resources, it means that individuals outside that ecosystem won't accept those results. Hence, we want to have consistent policy enforcement. We're going to spend the next several lessons talking about various infractions that can come up and how to handle them, but for this, we're going to stay entirely philosophical. I want to start by quoting the first line of this document with these procedure guidelines. The Competitive Policy Guide does not and cannot entirely encompass what to do in every situation. Many times your fix will be directly in the CPG, and you can and should follow the procedure as guided. 99 times out of 100, you'll be dealing with straightforward issues. A player forgot to exhaust the appropriate number of resources, somebody put an extra damage on a unit, a player grabbed an extra card while drawing for regroup. These sorts of common and simple scenarios are what the guidelines are for, and it's the expected skill set of level 2 judges to understand these infractions, the penalties, and the remedies. As the CPG says in several places, the goal is to promote fair and enjoyable experience for all players. It is central to the skills of being a judge to approach a situation with an impartial attitude and the goal of making the experience as positive for players as possible. While this does mean being vigilant for cheating, you need to temper that vigilance with respect and trust. If you begin judge calls with the belief that a player is cheating or could only have intentionally made the mistake, players will recognize that attitude and not feel welcome. They'll feel harassed and affronted. Players will also often feel offended for their opponent as well. Most players believe that their opponents are also operating in good faith, and if you come in like the Grand Inquisitor, they'll not be satisfied with the experience and, in the future, maybe not call a judge. If we train players to not call judges, there are a few consequences. First, cheaters will begin to thrive. If there's a culture of don't trust judges or judges aren't looking out for players, malicious actors can get away with, "Oh, sorry, let's just handle that ourselves. We don't need to call a judge." Second, outcomes will be less consistent. Players will fix things in different ways, and the outcomes of tournaments will be less based on how players played and begin to be influenced how well they can argue their case to their opponent. Even if players do try to do things by the book, they're less likely to have the appropriate training, and it's possible that they make things worse trying to fix it. Third, tournament organizers will see fewer calls and therefore see less need for judges, and consequently hire fewer judges, which will lead to a spiraling effect where the quality of experience goes down further and further for players. While being timely in handling calls is important for the overall experience, taking the time to consult with other judges, if other judges are immediately available, is deeply encouraged. If you're able to talk with the head judge or another senior judge, that's immensely valuable. But even talking with another judge who has the same or even less experience than you can help you wrap around your head around the problem in a way that speaking with players might not. Then let's talk about the role of a judge. This section of the CPG lays out a few key elements of a judge's role at events. It is important to remain impartial and objective, and maintaining a sense of appearance of impartiality and objectivity is equally important. As a level 2 judge, you may frequently judge at your local game store, where you know the majority of the players. If a new player comes into the space, it's important you treat them similarly to all of the players you already know. Feeling like a judge is biased, even if there is no real evidence of bias being in play, can be very alienating to a player. While you should recuse yourself should you not be able to remain impartial, that sometimes can't happen at local events because you are the only judge. If you need to take a moment to step away and reset yourself to focus on the facts, or if you need to consult with someone who's not involved but doesn't have the expertise that you do, those can be reasonable steps to help you maintain that impartiality. Now, sometimes a judge will be wrong. Possibly they misread a card, or they misheard a question, or they just didn't know a rule or screwed up a piece of policy. Judges will make mistakes. It's how the mistake is handled that is important. First, if you realized you've made a mistake and the match that it impacted is still ongoing, make it a priority to return to those players and identify what impact the error has had on the match. You can talk to players away from the table to ask if they've made decisions based on the ruling, if the game has progressed significantly, and more. If you did cause damage to the game, you can apply fixes as though it were a gameplay disruption to remedy it and get the game back on course. If you didn't, simply providing the corrected ruling and apologizing, which should be done in either case, can be sufficient. If you're a floor judge, it's important to escalate this to the head judge. Let the players know to pause as soon as you realize, to minimize the chances of this causing further damage. But inform the head judge before taking any steps to remedy the issue if it has progressed. These situations can get very tricky, and players can become upset if they felt that they are now incorrectly going to lose a game or match because of a judge ruling. However, it is important to remember that players always have the option to appeal a ruling. Players are not required to automatically accept what a judge says, even if they're the head judge. While players do have a responsibility to remain respectful, they can and should ask for clarification or explanation if they believe that the judge issuing the ruling is incorrect or is not explaining it thoroughly. Judging at your local game store, you're likely to be the only judge, so there isn't anyone for you to take the appeal to. But you should still listen to the player, hear their argument, and even potentially review the parts of the rules that they believe support their argument. Sometimes you're absolutely correct and absolutely confident in your ruling, and while you should let the player voice their concern, you don't have to let them to continue to debate it. When you've made up your mind, let the player know in no uncertain terms that this is your final ruling and that they need to return to playing their match. I frequently offer the opportunity to continue the conversation after the match because it is important that players understand why the game works the way it does, or why policy fixes things in particular ways. But if you're just arguing in circles, you want to keep the event moving and get them back to their game. This feels like I've barely dipped my toe into talking about policy and the competitive policy guide, and truly we only looked at 2 pages out of nearly 40. We'll be back in the next lesson to discuss infractions, penalties, and the penalty structure for the Star Wars Unlimited Organized Play program, before continuing with further lessons on the competitive policy guide for the next several lessons. If you're watching this on YouTube and you want more Level 2 lessons in your feed, go ahead and subscribe. Join us Tuesdays and Fridays after new lessons on twitch.tv/swoo_judges for broadcasts covering the content of these lessons as they are released, and join the Star Wars Unlimited Judge Program Discord to join the community discussion of this and much, much more. As always, good luck and have fun.